Hi again, everybody. Welcome into another edition. This is Cross Functionality, the show connecting coaching, baseball, softball, male, female, hosted by former college baseball and softball players. Thanks for being with us today. As always, episode 36, we're talking about dedication. Very important to have that on the field, but even more important to have that off the field. And we will explain, and by we, I mean myself and my friend co-host, softball national champion at the University of Alabama, and current day renowned coach, Cassie Bosha. Love doing this every week with you because
Yeah.
I get a chance to either see your cool attire from your academy or your cool Alabama gear that you're wearing today
Yes.
in the
Mm.
crimson.
This one is new. This one is a new one. It's Send It to the Brickyard, Alabama softball.
I like that.
So the Brickyard it was actually, I think it's neat. And for people who are coaching and trying to expand their program, instead of spending money to get seating, like actual stadium to style seating in the outfield wall, they did
Mhm.
big, looks like brick, like stone steps, which ended up being much cheaper. So they had a hillside and they did this big steps. And it's called the Brickyard, which I
I
think
like
is a
that.
pretty cool name. Yeah. So it's right beyond the right field and center field walls.
It's maybe Major League ballparks should do that more. Things like, but they wouldn't because they
Little
have to
culture
bid it.
things. Yeah.
Right.
There was one field that had a hill in Major League Baseball. I don't remember.
Yes, Houston. And then they took it
Yeah.
away.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
like
think
little
there's a
tidbits.
hill. There's a hill in like right field in some international ballpark somewhere. I can't
Mm.
remember, but I do remember that hill in Houston, the early days of Minute Maid Park, and everybody always said, "Hey, why is this hill here? It serves no purpose." And I will say that I agree with those people because that hill being in center field, it wasn't a culture thing. We've
Right.
talked.
It
I
was
think we've
just
talked about this before on the show. I mean, in professional sports, you don't develop a culture based off those little things like a hill. You do that in college sports because it's just the culture
yes.
is just different. You develop a
Yes.
culture of
Agreed.
winning and
Amen.
dedication when it comes to in professional
Amen.
sports. Yeah, talking about dedication today. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify. Watch on YouTube, Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. There's some pillars here we need to talk about today when it comes to dedication. Power of habit, tools of consistency or tools for consistency, sacrifice, and knowing your role. And we could start with the power of habit. And I think that when it comes to you mentioned something last week actually on the show that I laughed at. But it made a lot of sense. And you talked about when you're coaching baseball players, softball players, and they set up the tee right in the middle of the plate, right? And they hit balls right back up the middle and they feel good about themselves. And you mentioned, well, you're not gonna get that pitch in the game. So you better move the tee around. And it's easy to do things like that and be successful in the cage in that scenario. But the real dedication, today's topic, episode 36, that comes from the power of habit that you have off the field as well, and those little things that you're doing to make yourself better on the field. And that comes from sleep, it comes from nutrition, all of those little things that a lot of people will overlook.
Yeah, and I think the point of this is, when you're dedicated, you're committed to something, right? But to be dedicated to something or to be committed to something is difficult, and it's
Mhm.
nice to be able to do it in a moment or right when you join a team. Or how many people have a sophomore slump because they were dedicated their freshman year, going into their freshman year, and then not so much after that. So
Mhm.
you really have to buy into this is the reason I'm going to be successful is going to be because of how powerful these tiny little habits are that are going to lead to a very consistent life. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that's something that gets very social media makes it seem like those aren't as important, I think, because what
Mhm.
people see on social media is oh, they started here and within a minute I get to see all these clips of an entire year maybe, and it makes it seem like it happened like that,
Right.
not the grind of, if you will, the grind of waking up early or having a nighttime routine or having a morning routine or buying a Whoop to see how you're sleeping. It's all
Mhm.
these tiny little things. Journaling after you hit, even when it's hard, like doing these habits are so extremely powerful, and it's not going to feel good in the moment. It's going to be that marshmallow effect. It's going to be a long delayed gratification before you're like, okay, this is why it made sense to do all those tiny things the right way.
We talked about the marshmallow effect last week, actually, on last week's show. So go back and listen in the archives,
Yeah.
wherever you get your podcasts. And with dedication, you know, you mentioned something in there too with social media and how it's easy now to put clips together. There's apps for that where you can just quickly put together your main highlights that make you look successful, and that's all well and good. But it's still, and this will never go out of style, no matter what technology comes around. I don't believe this will ever change. It's what you're doing behind the scenes that people don't see. It's that at times, unfortunately, the internal and external struggle that you may have when it comes with the dedication to try and get better and get to that next step.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's probably especially because we are so like short-term focused. How many times do people actually enjoy sitting? I mean, look what we're doing in baseball. We're trying to shorten the game because no one likes to sit through a long game, and
Yeah.
movies are shorter, and things are just not as long because our attention spans are so shortened. So, yeah, telling someone like, listen, you're going to have to for 2 years really dedicate yourself to these things in order to see a result is difficult. People are like, what are you talking about? Like my value on time. Like, look at this is an example I just read in a book. So it's not a, but meditation versus Xanax. You have people who like want to feel calm. That's the desired outcome. And they're more willing to take a pill instead of committing themselves to the habit of meditation, even though we know meditation long-term is going to be healthier and maybe a better outcome. But
Yeah.
the way people are valuing time and that commitment is I think what changes the perspective on that.
Yeah, some of the books too that talking about habit, and I wrote them down here. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Right, I don't know if I said
I
that
don't know how
right.
to pronounce the last name. I think that was a good attempt.
Yeah, Charles. It's not even. If it was Italian, I could read it. Atomic Habits. That's one of the more popular ones by James
I'm in love
Clear.
with that book. That is a very
Yes,
good book.
so you
Yes.
read that book.
I've read both.
Okay, so what did you glean from those two books?
Okay, so the power of habit, you start to learn about the cycles, right?
Hmm.
So like it's like, okay, well, you're wanting to lose weight, right? And so you're like, I'm gonna go to the gym and work out. But you don't realize that whether you like it or not, because you've at 2 o'clock in the past have decided to go get a coffee, and then with that coffee have gotten a donut, that all of a sudden you start to yawn and your brain is like, I want a donut. It's like, it's very much like it seems simple, but like when you say it something like that, like, why you crave certain things, why all of a sudden certain things pop in your mind, but you realize you're on an autopilot more than you realize, and so much of your brain is autopilot into habits,
Yeah,
and that can sometimes seem scary because you're like, wait, am I actually in control of this, or are my habit cycles that I've developed in control of what I'm doing? But then you become very empowered by it when you realize you can start to hack these. Actually, I know I've talked about this before, but what I got from Power of Habit, one of the main things that, I think when you're reading a book and your jaw actually drops, I think it sticks with you for a while. But
oh sure, yeah, and
yeah,
it's
and some
rare too. That's rare that happens.
oh, for sure.
So
So in this book, I'm reading about how every time, one compliment, sorry, excuse me, let me rephrase that. One detrimental comment, so like a
mhm,
negative comment about yourself, you need 3 compliments to outweigh it and just get back to feeling neutral. And so, that made sense. And I was like, yeah, okay. So negative feedback, like we're so impacted by it, right? When my coach would chew me out, like it hurt way worse than, a compliment from him would feel good. Right. So, but it makes
sure,
sense. That's human nature. And so they gave the example, like, if you hear 3 negative comments about yourself, you need 9 compliments to just get back to neutral. And I was like, wow, that's powerful. But like, besides
yeah,
like a bullying scenario, I'm like, how often in our adult life are we hearing negative comments about ourselves all the time? And I turn the page and they say, by the way, what you say to yourself counts. So when you wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror, or when you're hitting and you're like, I suck, I can't believe I'm not doing this right, whatever it may be. He goes on to say, no wonder you could get like 40 comments on social media of like, oh my gosh, you're so pretty, you're this, whatever, and it doesn't feel good. Like you've put yourself in such a hole. And the idea that negative self-talk was a choice at some point until it turns into a habit. And once you're in a habit of like, I screwed up, I berate myself, I screwed up, I berate myself, that's when we find ourselves in like not just deep mental performance holes, but deep mental health holes.
right.
So anyway, that was a little long-winded, but I remember that internal dialogue. I was like, oh yeah, I'm not kind to myself all the time. And a lot of us probably are harsher on ourselves than we are on anyone else in our life. And then the atomic habits, I mean, when you talk about habit hacking or lifestyle hacking, essentially, like finding anchors in your day, like so much of what I've talked about on this podcast were snippets that came from that book. Had a habit stack, it just was. I actually thought James Clear was like a stage name because he wrote so clearly. I thought he like picked an author's name, as silly as that sounds. It was just, the book is thick, so it might seem intimidating, but it's a book you can read chapter by chapter or a couple pages by couple pages and pick back up and just find something where you're like, wow, I can do that tomorrow with my day. So anyway, I highly recommend both.
James Clear, expert on habits and decision making. This is from his website, jamesclear.com. Made his name as an author and has one of the fastest growing newsletters, email newsletters in history. Went from 0 to 10,000, or excuse me, 0 to 100,000. Whoa, 100,000 subscribers in under 2 years. Went to Denison University in 2008, and he is from Hamilton, Ohio. So thank you, James. Also, another book that I suggest people read too. I want to throw this one in there. I've heard good reviews. I actually heard a good review from a family member about this one. Better Than Before by Gretchen Rubin. So those are the three books right there: Power of Habit, Atomic Habits, and Better Than Before by Charles Duhigg, James Clear, Gretchen Rubin, respectively.
I will have
So
to
those
check the
three,
rest of that.
yeah, those three books are probably the best when it comes to habits and habit stack. I love habit stacking. That is great
Mm,
though. And the anchor point in your day, or anchor points in your
right,
day. It serves as a good little reset of your day.
right,
No matter
right.
what time you get up in the morning, doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Like we think change in our life is so daunting, but we already have so many habits and so many anchors built into our day already. So
Right.
it's like, hey, all you have to do is start to sneak little tiny changes into these anchors or attach them to these anchors, And I don't know. I think it's great.
Yeah, you look at, the habit part, and when you discuss all these little habits, all these little things that you need to do, not just individually, but as a team as well. So you're in a house out in Tuscaloosa right now,
Mhm.
and you've got on all your Alabama gear. You're a softball national champion. You've got that championship ring. What were some examples of little habits that you guys did as a team that got you to that point?
You know what? At the time, I don't think I realized they were a big deal, and I guess that's the point. We just thought this
Yeah.
was the right way to do it, and I
Hmm.
think the quote where it's like, "What is each day but a series of decisions between the right way and the easy way?" I think we
Hmm.
were constantly in the habit of choosing the right way.
Hmm.
Um, a couple things we did. We met as a team without our coaches, without being told to, just as a team. Before the week to just discuss what's our focus for this week, and we got to really decide it as a team. Sure, it was um, senior led, but it was from us. And it was, how cool is it to go out in the field and be like, yeah, this is what we've decided to do. Um, so I think that was one. We made a promise to each other to be unbelievably intelligent about social media. So we didn't have a TikTok or a Snapchat, but Twitter was very prevalent. Facebook
Sure.
was very popular, and even when Murphy, our head coach, left for LSU to go coach at another school, we texted everybody in the team, texted each other and said, nobody posts anything until you feel like you're not upset by this anymore. And as weird as that sounds, we like, if
Mhm.
we were upset after a loss, if we were upset after a coach leaving, if we were whatever it was, if we were upset, we just made a promise to not post until we weren't upset. Um, so I thought things like that were neat. It was certainly ingrained in us, but everywhere we went, if you were 10 minutes early, you were just on time. So you had to be at least 15 to 20 minutes early to everything we did, whether that was getting on the bus, practice, you were at least an hour early. It was those little things like showing up early, making sure everything was taken care of. And then finally, the last thing, and probably my favorite thing our coach made us do, is there's a hired on salary cleaning crew for our facility, our locker room and everything else.
Mhm.
We had cleaning crews assigned, and it was like, you leave whatever you're at better than the way you left it, whether that's a dugout. Like, you might walk into a dugout and it is a mess, but when you leave, you make sure all of that mess is cleaned up, not just the mess you made. And when you're in a locker room, your locker has to look a certain way when you walk out and leave. And you know what? A quick vacuum is going to make a big difference. And maybe that
Yeah.
takes pressure off of how much a cleaning crew has to do. And we're just showing our gratitude for everything that they do in the clubhouse. And so I thought that was really neat. And that might seem strange because a lot of that didn't have anything to do with us actually playing on the field. But I
Mhm.
think all those little things made a big deal into why we ended up winning.
And for full context purposes, Murph never left.
Yeah, that's
He's
right.
going
Murphy came
to,
back.
but he,
He
yeah,
he left for 3 days. He did
yeah.
a full gone press conference at LSU in a purple tie, and then he came back.
Oh, God, what was your reaction when he came back? Were you just, oh, you couldn't believe it, right?
There was so much shock, and like
Yeah.
there was shock when he left, shock when the assistant was leaving too, and then when he came back, it was almost like, because for those 3 days you're like, how is this going to get fixed? How is this like, where's the solution? And this is a solution you never even thought was happening. So, um, yeah, it was definitely a whirlwind, but at the end of the day, that's a human you care about. And I think every single person on our team knew like there was something going on with our university. Like this is an individual who was trying to figure out a job and what was going to secure his family and his life. Um, there were clearly issues maybe on one university end where there was lack of communication for him to initially leave. So like I think it wasn't like, oh, what are you doing? Just tugging us around. There was just, you cared about someone as a human and realized that this was going to be really hard. It was going to be really courageous for him to come back.
Yeah. Especially with maybe a contract was signed and contractual stuff. Wow, yeah,
Yeah.
crazy story. We've had Murphy on the show, by the way.
Yes.
Patrick Murphy as our special guest co-host. So go back in the archives and listen to that. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on social media at Jim Tara and at Coach_CassieRB on Instagram, at Coach CassieRB on Twitter. Let's talk a little bit about the tools for consistency and what kind of tools you need for yourself and that you need to have in front of you, so to speak, to actually be as consistent as possible with your habits and in turn with your dedication.
I think we've talked about this in some different ways throughout the shows, but I mean, having some type of accountability is probably the number one. So your accountability can come in various forms. So your accountability might be your why, and it might be referencing your why over and over again. Your accountability factor might be, hey, here's my nighttime routine, here's my morning routine, and I'm actually tracking these things. Accountability might be you have like a partner you're doing this with. So you have a teammate or a coach or a mentor or someone who's checking in with you, or you're checking back in with saying like, hey, only hit 3 out of my 5 new habits today. And that's it. Like, it's not good or bad. It's just part of the process of you working on being as consistent as possible. Consistency, I also think some people have in their head means being perfect, where that's like, oh,
good point.
I'm going to hit every single one of my marks every single day. My bucket is going to be completely full. My willpower is going to be full. My energy is going to be full. I'm never going to take a day off. That's not what means being consistent means. It means that, hey, you're accepting the fact that some days are going to stink and you're not going to hit some days, but you're going to come back the next day. And something James Clear actually talks about in his book is you're going to miss. You just never miss twice. You just never miss 2 times in a row. And I thought that was, missing 1 time is kind of just like a hiccup. Missing 2 times in a row is a start of a new habit. So, and that might be one you don't care for. So I think those setting up those structures for accountability is the base for consistency. And then what happens from there is you're going to start to find, okay, you know what? Touching base with someone is not what works best for me, but journaling is what works best for me, or whatever it may be. You're going to find out what avenue really clicks, and then that's going to be the river you kind of take down and really hone in on.
Yeah, you made all great points there, and James Clear really had an impression on you, didn't he?
He was a good one. Yeah.
He was good. I've never read that book. I would like to, though. I have read The Power of Habit. I have not read Atomic Habits. I will eventually read that James Clear book, though. When you talk about this one, I guess, might be the most important. And I'm sure you've played with people in high school and maybe even in college, and you've seen players like this now as a renowned coach. Players who just don't have not just the dedication, but the sacrifice. I'm looking down because I wrote notes down. I want to make sure that I'm saying this correctly and I'm dissecting this correctly. When you talk about sacrifice, I knew a lot of people in high school who were really good, just didn't have that real true sacrifice. They say they would, but it was all just a show. That might be sacrifice, the most important thing when it comes to dedication. Sacrifice on the field, but more importantly, arguably, sacrifice off the field. Doing those little things every single day, the things that aren't popular, the things that you don't want to do, not following along with the crowd, not doing certain things that other people might be doing and that you have to do to get better. And just overall sacrificing a lot of things to be a successful, not just baseball, softball player, but an athlete in general.
Everything has a cost. And I always think of that. Let's say you're at a crossroads where it's like, well, I could go to this tournament or I could go to this school dance. I could go hang out with my friends or I could go do the training I'm supposed to do. I could do whatever it may be. It's not, and sacrifice doesn't mean you have to always choose like for you to suffer. There is enjoyment in the process of being consistent and protecting yourself with positive habits, but You're going to have crossroads, and it will have a cost. It's either it's going to suck right now, maybe that I can't go hang out with my friends, or it's going to suck later when you didn't hit your mark you wanted to, and you have to second guess, well, did I actually give everything I was capable of giving?
Yeah.
So I think, that sacrifice piece, you're sacrificing feeling good, right? Like
Mhm.
working out is hard, and you're going to feel sore, and you're going to be tired, and it's not going to, like, your body's going to hurt. Double headers, whatever it may be, like, you're sacrificing a lot of what your body, you're sacrificing a lot of your time, you're sacrificing so many different things, but it is a privilege to have that sacrifice. Like, why is it a negative all the time? Why is it like, oh, poor me, I can't go do this? It's like, you know, people used to ask me, hey, do you feel like you missed out on a college experience? And I wanted to look back and be like, I won 3 SEC championships and a national championship. Do you feel like you missed out on my experience? Like,
And
why
you
is it
say
not
it in that tone, by the way.
yeah, well, I didn't say that, but that was my first thought is like,
Yeah.
I had a completely different experience, but I sacrificed and for mine, and that's what I wanted most though, and I think when people are deciding on colleges or travel teams, it's like that should be your first question. Like, is this easy, is an easy sacrifice? What you're going to need to sacrifice to get to where you want to get to. Is this something that you can wrap your head around? And if it's too daunting, that's okay. That's not a bad thing. It's just this might not be the right path for you. This might not be the right aspiration for you.
Athletes seem to flock together when it comes to collegiate sports, collegiate athletics, because a lot of times they have and share that common goal. What would your advice be, though, for athletes who have to sacrifice as part of their dedication and they're surrounded by people who don't share that same sacrifice, don't share those same pillars and principles of dedication? How can they go about finding those people that are dedicated and can sacrifice what they need to get to the next level?
As hard as it might be, you might have to be lonely for a little bit, and not in
Mhm.
a bad way. Just I had when I got to college, I didn't have a single one of my friends I grew up with that decided to play college sports. And that doesn't mean that they're bad people. They're all still in my life. They were all still at my wedding. It just meant that when I needed to find support and find accountability partners, it wasn't from those group of people. And that would be unfair for me to look at for that from them. So, you know, finding other people in my area, training with other people, like that was very, very helpful. But again, it wasn't viewing as something as good and bad. It wasn't black and white. It was just, you see, it's like if your friends are not supporting you in your goals, find new friends. It doesn't mean that you ditch the old ones and say, well, screw you. You're not, you're not part of my circle anymore. It just means
Yeah.
it's going to be so much. It's not even that it's going to be easier for you to sacrifice when you find people in your corner. You're going to be able to achieve a level of greatness you couldn't have achieved if you didn't have those people with you. You know what it feels like to work out with someone who's pushing you. You know what it feels like to train with someone than it is on your own. Like those things matter. So kind of being lonely for a little bit, or just picking and choosing my conversations, or having the expectation with those people in my life that was very different than the expectation that I had for the people I trained with, my mentors, and anything else.
Yeah, it's a
I
tough
stayed,
thing. That
yeah,
sacrifice is very tough.
sorry.
No, go
I
ahead. Go
stayed
ahead.
I stayed 2 summers in Alabama. That was what I had wanted to say. After my
Mhm.
freshman year, I stayed
Mhm.
the next 2 summers in Alabama because I didn't have that support system at home. And I
Yeah.
think that was really hard for some of my friends and family to wrap their head around. Was like, you just spent all year there, and now the time you have off to come home, you're not. But that just in my head, I knew I wasn't going to be able to. I was going to be a very different version of myself had I not stayed those summers down there.
How did you get over that loneliness? I think that's a lot of people where they hit a brick wall trying to
Yeah,
figure
you
out.
know what? I had my parents, and
Mhm.
to be honest, if I didn't have my parents, I don't think I would have been a lot harder for me to choose that. So I'm not saying this was like, oh, look at me, I'm just so good at suffering. Like it wasn't necessarily that. It just was my parents supported me like crazy. I had so many cousins I got to hang out with. I had like that were very supportive. They didn't understand it, but they were like, you have to do what you want to do. Cause it would have been so much harder if I got texts or phone calls from my cousins that was like, I don't get it. Maybe they didn't get it, but they supported me through it. So I had this support system for my family like crazy. And even my friends, like, after I just said, this is where I feel like I have to be. I want to win a national championship. I only have 4 times to do it. They were like, okay, cool. And then, after that, it was, you start to realize who's going to be in your life for the long term and who might not be. And like I said, everything has a cost. So it's either you suffer now through this
Mhm.
and it affects you later on, or for the better, or you suffer later So I wanted to suffer now instead of later.
So, how many of those friends are still in your life?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, all six that I graduated with at, I mean, big time in my life. Went to their baby showers. They're at my wedding. We're all in each other's weddings.
What
It
about
wasn't.
okay? So, what about the friends who you when you I don't want to say left behind, but the friends who when you went into your I guess lonely period to achieve your goals, what happened to those friends from the past?
They still supported me. It just wasn't. I didn't have as much of like a daily relationship. I guess that's I
Hmm.
guess really the biggest difference. It wasn't as I wasn't calling them as much on the phone, and certainly like when I came back, it was like I maybe didn't get invited to as much stuff because I usually just wasn't there to be invited, and that was okay. Like that, I wasn't hurt by that. I wasn't. It just was what it was. And again, I think because I had fulfillment from so many other areas of my life, from my family, from your big rocks, right? It wasn't as daunting, and I was also honest with my friends too. It was like we had such completely different agendas in college, and that was okay, and they understood that,
Hmm.
and if I really don't think I had a friend who just was like, "Oh, I don't get that," and left. I think they completely understood where I was at.
Yeah, I came up with the title already for this show. We're talking today,
Mhm.
episode 36, about dedication, and you mentioned in there actually twice in today's show. Everything has a cost.
Mm.
Everything has a price. Every
Yeah.
part of success. That's
Yes.
part of the dedication part. A lot of people don't really seem to wrap their head around that. And that you ever see that photo online? It's always on, I guess, Instagram. I think it's been on Twitter before. The ice, um, the iceberg. It's like the
Oh,
iceberg effect.
yes.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, where
Yeah.
under the water, there's all the things that people don't see, but they only see the top of the iceberg. And a lot of times, people in their success, they don't. I'll take Aaron Judge for example. You being a Yankee fan, uh, people don't see what he has sacrificed, what he has gone through, the swing changes. I'm sure that came with a lot of mental struggle at times because he's had to make swing changes, and it's not comfortable at first. But at the end of the day, he is very well paid, and he's been very successful on the field, and he's the captain now, El
And you'll still
Capitan.
have you're right. You'll still have people saying like, just go up there, see it, and hit it.
Yeah,
That's all he's doing.
yeah.
He's just going up there, seeing it, and hit. And finally, he's just seeing it and hitting it.
Right, right, right. I love that. Yeah, yeah. I love that saying. Which, hey, look, I love Pete Rose as much as anybody, but Pete Rose also had a plan up there at the plate. It wasn't just see the ball, hit the ball. It's
Right.
one of those. It's one of those things I that I'm starting to get annoyed by. Another thing I get annoyed by the way, when people say baseball and softball, it always evens out for hitters. It never does.
Mm.
Never. If it did, you'd hit 500,
There you go. Yeah.
right? So it never. I heard that again the other night too, and I was like, nope, nope. It doesn't ever
You know
even
what?
out.
I used to tell myself that to make myself feel better when I would line out or hit a shot that got robbed over the fence. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna hit like a little like jammed ball that go right a second. Like, it's just to make me feel better, maybe.
Yeah, right. You're gaslighting yourself to make
Yes.
yourself feel better, but it's really doesn't even out in the end,
Right.
because if it did, you'd have every out that you hit hard, you would have that come back to you in like say a squib hit or something.
Right.
Never
Right.
works like that. Before we wrap up today, episode 36, dedication, email us your questions to comments, jimbopodcast21 at gmail.com. And you can also reach out to us on social media and, of course, on YouTube as well. The Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. Leave your comments and we'll try to read them if they're good. If not, we'll just whatever, leave them there. I'm going to talk about knowing your role, though, when it comes to
Sure.
dedication in today's episode. Knowing your role as it ties in with all the things we've talked about today with the habits and the sacrifice on our episode of dedication.
Yeah. The main point to that is like you can't do any, if you don't know what your role is, how are you going to sacrifice for it? How are you going to be
Mhm.
dedicated to it? If you're constantly confused by like, well, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my job here? Like, then how are you going to be able to actually improve upon it? Right. So many times knowing that role is huge. Like you might be a role player that's not playing as much, but you still have a role to work extremely hard in practice to try to pick signs from the other team, to try to or pick what the pitcher's pitching, whatever it may be. Like,
Do it
um,
legally, of course, not like the
yes,
Astros did
yes, yes, yes. You know what I mean? There's so many other things that you can be doing, but if you don't know that role, how are you supposed to feel good about, right? It feels good to sacrifice for something and be like, man, I did my job to the best of my ability. And that will just feed the fire for staying dedicated, for staying committed, to being able to wake up with the consistency and the habits, like that'll feed it. But if you wake up lost in the morning being like, I don't really know what I'm doing here, I don't play, I don't whatever, like it's going to just be so much harder. So as coaches, like if you're a coach or a parent listening to this, like does everyone on your team know their role? And let's treat the dugout of the non-starters as an actual position, and provide roles, and not just be like, all right, I'm just kind of taking care of my starters. If there's gonna be people unhappy in your team causing a rift, it's people who are not playing, you know? So actually a very famous Coach Murphy comment is know your role and shut your hole. And that was it was just like, shut up and do your job. That's it. Like as long as you know your job. So I always appreciated that. I always thought really good teams, you didn't see a delineation between starters and non-starters. Everyone was excited for the starters. Like there was always good energy from all teammates because people had that validity in their role.
We had a great episode this week. I think you and I can both relate to having to dedicate a lot and sacrifice, and how that lonely road, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here, but that lonely road is not easy, but it is at times very worth it. And I will say that if the outcome didn't turn out the way you wanted, it still is fulfilling knowing that you still pursued that and you still went for something. And it may not have worked out, but you still went for something, and it just makes it, that price you paid, it makes it worth it in the end. It gives you kind of a peace of mind, especially you and I growing up in the Northeast. In the South, it's a little bit different, but growing up in a cold weather climate, it's very easy to just let that dedication go and just kind of throw caution at the wind, so to speak, and hope that what you do off the field, or lack thereof, won't show up when you go and play on the field. And it does. Ultimately, it does in the end.
Yeah. I wasn't planning on telling this quick story, but I think it is relevant. I had a teammate, her name's Jordan Patterson. She's here for Alumni Weekend. She was the hardest worker I have ever played with. She was 2 years younger than me. It was finally her turn to be the catcher, the starting catcher, her junior year. And Murphy brings in a catching transfer and says, we needed this bat in the lineup. And he looks to Jordan and says, I need you to be a supportive player here. So that was her role. She takes this girl Molly under her wing. She ends up rooming with her, and all of a sudden, Jordan, in her head, she kept saying, well, what, the game knows. The game's going to reward me. The game's going to reward me. And she continued to work her butt off. She continued to support the people around her. And she finished all 4 years not really ever starting, not really ever playing. And she sat back and she was like, does the game actually really know? She started to question it. And she went on this, it was just a meet and greet with someone. She was going to be a lawyer. And this law firm had never accepted any student outside of Ivy's or Stanford. And so she knew there wasn't a chance she was going to intern at this law firm. She was just using this conversation to help. He was going to help place her somewhere else, suggest somewhere else. And he, in the middle, brings up this newspaper article. He goes, I read about you. You supported this girl when she was coming in for your position. And Jordan was like, oh, yeah, that was my role, whatever. He goes, I want people like this on my staff. And he took, for the first time ever, this particular law firm took someone outside of the Ivies or Stanford, someone from Alabama, which is not known for their education. And she realized, she goes, the game knows. That was the game knowing. I thought I was going to get rewarded in hits or home runs or whatever it was. My sacrifice paid off here. And so she's an extremely successful lawyer, moving on to, big things in Washington, D.C. And I just think it's very, very cool. That's a good... Okay, that's your sacrifice. That's what you paid for, essentially.
You talk about the power of habits. How about the power of karma? In a way,
there you
right?
go.
Good way to wrap up today's show, episode 36, dedication. Next week and in the coming weeks, we're talking about energy, competitiveness, having that energy. We'll be talking about that, episode 37 next week. Besides Alumni Weekend, what else you got going on?
Well, I have to shout out Canada. I was in Canada, Quebec, for this past weekend. Did 10 hours of coaching clinics and teaching clinics with athletes. Did not realize, I knew they spoke French. I didn't realize that was the main language, and heard from a couple of people that they listen to our podcast, that they sometimes need a translator for it, but they listen to the podcast, which I thought was super cool. They don't have softball in high schools. There's barely a following and coaching, and they had never met, a lot of them had never met someone who played college softball. And so it was just such a rewarding experience because they were good. I would like to say every athlete I worked with had very good swing, very good fundamentals, extremely strong, and they all made eye contact with me the entire time. There was nobody who was like, I'm just here. So I appreciate that. I thought it was awesome, and that was a very cool experience.
All right. Well, do you know what's the team name?
It's not really a team. They have like a couple of clinics that they do here and
Okay,
there.
so it's not
It's
okay. So then we okay. All
yeah,
right.
but I'm sorry. There is a travel team that I worked with, the Lynx. That was
The
a
Lynx. Okay.
yes.
Well, hopefully
Yeah,
they listen and shout out to the Lynx. Can you imagine us translated in French?
yeah. You know, I'm sure there's some AI that could do it
Yeah, I
somewhere.
know. Soon it's going to come down to a point where people could take our voices and stuff from previous shows and reverse what we're saying. So I'd be talking
Right. Just make a whole
you
new
and
show
you. Yeah.
about.
Inverted cross
Yeah.
functionality. All right, subscribe to the podcast, episode 36 today. Thank you for joining us. Episode 37, talking about where you glean that energy from, gain that energy. We'll be talking about that next week. Thank you for listening and watching. We will talk to you then. Take care.